Good afternoon. Welcome to Farm Credit Illinois' Ag Minded Hour webinar series. The intent of this series is to offer timely topics and information that are easily digestible over your noon hour while you take lunch or go about your day. If you are experiencing any audio issues, refer to the registration email, and you can use the phone number there to dial into the meeting. Your microphone is automatically muted upon you joining, but if you do have questions, please use the question panel and feel free to ask those, and then myself or the presenter will get back to you at an appropriate time throughout the program today. And as we kick off today, we are going to dive right into our topic. We have Megan Miller with us, the Grants and Programs Manager with Precision Conservation Management. She comes from a little town called Bartonville, went to Eastern Illinois for college, off to North Carolina State, and somehow came back to Illinois to join us here today. With her role, she writes and manages the grants for PCM and ultimately is trying to maximize funding available to farmers and landowners within Illinois. So we're certain that you will take away some great information from Megan today. And before I hand it off to her, again, just a reminder, if you have any issues, feel free to either refer back to your email or drop something in the chat, and we will try to help you out as best as we can. And then we do want today to be as interactive as possible. So although we can't see you and you can only see us, be sure to drop questions and get involved, and we'll be sure to get back to you or incorporate those into today's program. So I will now turn it over to Megan.
So, as Caitlin said, my name is Megan Miller, and I'm the Grants and Programs Manager for the Precision Conservation Management Program. And today we're going to try to make sense of everything carbon markets, climate smart funding, and conservation programs in Illinois. So really appreciate you being here today. So before I go into the carbon part of the talk, I do want to talk a little bit about what PCM is and how it can help you. So PCM was started by the Illinois corn growers in 2015 in response to the nutrient loss reduction strategy. We wanted to be able to track the good work farmers were doing to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus runoff in Illinois. And how we approached doing this was benchmarking your farm financials against other people in the state and in the region. So the first thing PCM can do for you, and the very core of our offerings, is providing you a better understanding of your farm financials with the goal of creating a pathway to profitable conservation farming. And this is a free service to farmers in the PCM region. And so how we do this is by working with FPFM and FarmDoc to benchmark your farm's financials. Enrollment is free, as I said, and you as a farmer, because this is checkoff funded, actually get $750 for the first 2 years of enrollment. We currently have about 500 farmers in the program and close to 500,000 acres, and have partnered with over 30 organizations to get there. Really proud of those statistics. We are currently available in these colored in regions in Illinois. We have 8 specialists in Illinois, and the reason our regions are a bit smaller is because our specialists are actually visiting you on your farm 3 to 4 times a year. We don't want you to do any data entry. We want to do all of that for you. So we also have 2 specialists in Nebraska and 1 specialist in Western Kentucky as well. The next thing we can do after we benchmark your operation is we can provide you with conservation funding from our partners, and we can even provide you incentives if you have a history of cover cropping and no-tilling. That being said, you can enroll in PCM and be in any other funding conservation program out there. We really just want to see conservation on the ground. So just to go over quickly some of our incentive programs we're offering right now. We've been partnered with PepsiCo for quite a while, and so we have an insetting program with them, and we'll all know what that means by the end of the talk. But what I want you to notice right now is that it is a pay-for-practice program with a 1-year contract, and it can stack with other federal or state programs. So we're also the technical assistance partner for Farmers for Soil Health, and that is statewide in Illinois, Kentucky, and Nebraska. So anyone in those 3 states can enroll, and we will help you and provide cover crop technical assistance. And this is a descending payment of $25, $15, and $10 a year. So now that I've told you a little bit about our funding, I want to zoom out and talk about why we're even talking about carbon funding to begin with. So in the last 5 or 6 years, and maybe even a bit before that internationally, many companies and countries have committed to carbon neutrality or even carbon negativity within the next decades. And so when somebody says they want to be carbon neutral, a company, for example, wants to be carbon neutral, that means they want to offset any emissions they may produce between into the future from the date they set that goal. Carbon negativity means they would want to remove any carbon emissions over the life cycle of the company. And so you'll hear me talk a lot about carbon dioxide today, but that is not the only greenhouse gas. Methane, nitrous oxide, and other gases make up greenhouse gas emissions, but we deal in carbon dioxide equivalents in this space. And so when I'm talking about carbon, I'm really talking about the combination of all the gases that can lead to greenhouse gas accumulation. So one of the big questions I get is, why is agriculture being pulled into the carbon market space? So one thing that we know as farmers and people that work in agriculture is your crops are tools that put carbon dioxide in the ground, and that is just naturally from photosynthesis. We know that plants use carbon dioxide in order to make their sugars, and then they release oxygen, and that is what we breathe. And so that is pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. And your soil is responsible for keeping the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So cover crops allow the soil to continuously receive CO2 from the atmosphere throughout the year. And no-till prevents that carbon dioxide from leaving the soil, and that has a lot to do with maintaining those soil aggregates within your farmland. So cover crops and no-till are 2 of the main practices, switching to those that can get you into a carbon market. And that is because based on some modeling that the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership has done in the state, cover cropping and no-tilling can sequester about an additional 1.5 tons of CO2 per acre. And so I did just tell you that your corn and soybean and even wheat plants are pulling carbon dioxide into the soil. And so I get the question a lot of, can I enroll without doing a cover crop or no-till or something like that? And so we modeled that out to see what it would look like on a 79-acre bean field in central Illinois with kind of the farmer standard tillage practice there. And across that whole 79 acres, we only sequestered 5 tons of carbon with just our typical cropping system. And so that equates to about 0.06 tons per acre, which really isn't enough meat on the bone for a company to get involved in transacting. And that's why we have to often, do those other conservation practices in order to enter a market. So some common practices for market enrollment deal with fertilizer, cover crops, tillage, and rotation. This is not an exhaustive list, and each program is specific as to what they need you to do. So, be sure if you're enrolling in any program to check with your program manager on your practice decisions. But with fertilizer, you can adjust your application timing, you can reduce your rate, you can add an inhibitor, or you could switch to organic fertilizer or compost, and that would get you into a carbon market. For cover crops, you can, A, add cover crops. B, if you haven't been, B, you can also diversify your rotation or your mixture. You can change how you plant them and terminate them as well, and that all plays a factor in carbon markets. You can also change your tillage type or frequency, even go down to no-till. Many markets also allow strip till as well. And then you can add crops into that rotation, such as wheat in the winter or other things like that. So depending on the market, they all have different practices, but I would say for the most part, reducing your fertilizer, adding cover crops, and reducing your tillage will be able to get you in. And we know that there are a lot of soil health benefits when it comes to implementing these conservation practices. So it can help with soil temperature and moisture regulation, keep your soils cooler in the warmest parts of the summer. It can reduce soil loss from wind and water. It can help with winter, annual, and early season weed suppression. I know a lot of people have actually been able to cut out an herbicide pass because of their cover crops. It can improve your soil structure, increase the diversity of soil biological communities, and allow nutrient capture and availability. And really, because we are the checkoff and we are farmers, working on behalf of other farmers in the state, we just want to make sure that your nutrients are staying where you put them in the soil. You spend a lot of money on fertility, and we want to make sure you can turn that into your crop. So when it comes to carbon markets or any conservation program, really, the key to successful conservation program enrollment is understanding the funding source. And there are really three ways this can happen right now. There's private, which we'll talk about. There's public, which is government funding, or there's hybrids of both. So this graph here shows all the three different types of funding. On the left, we have federal and state funding. So in the Natural Resource Conservation Service provides conservation funding through Farm Bill programs, and then the Illinois Department of Agriculture also has a cover crop program. And we see this in other states as well, where states will have state incentives. On the private side of this, there's the carbon market or carbon intensity side of things. And this is where companies, CPGs, or other industries like PepsiCo or Microsoft are providing funding to farmers to implement conservation practices. And then the carbon intensity market, you see ethanol producers like ADM, for example, will give your full farm a carbon intensity score, and then that will, based on that score, that will turn into a premium. We'll talk about this a bit more. This hasn't rolled out yet, but is definitely coming down the pipe. And then there is a hybrid approach where the USDA has partnered with a lot of these bigger CPG companies in the partnerships for climate smart commodities. So the first funding type we'll deep dive is government funding. So this comes from the Farm Bill, and within the last 2 years, a pretty big increase from the Inflation Reduction Act. We have the EQIP program, which is statewide, national program. And this will fund conservation on a portion of your farm. So you can enroll just a field in this program, and you would work with your local NRCS office to do this. There's also Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. These are administered by either NRCS or the lead partner, and what this means is a group similar to PCM or the Decatur Watershed, for example, will put in a proposal to the USDA that allows us to hold a pool of money, an additional pool of money in the state for cover crops, no-till, whatever we apply for. So that is another type of USDA funding available. There's also CSP funding, which is similar to EQIP, except this is you would enroll your whole farm. So you would be committing your whole farm to nutrient management, no-till, or cover cropping. And again, you would visit your NRCS office for that. As far as state programs go, we have the Fall Covers for Spring Savings program that comes out right after it seems like Christmas every year. This is a statewide program administered by the IDOA, and it provides a $5 per acre cover crop payment. So in addition to the public programs, there's also private funding available for all of these, as I mentioned earlier. And the first type of funding we will review is carbon credits or carbon insetting. So carbon insets account for GHG or greenhouse gas reductions as grain moves through the value chain to the end user. So this provides farmers with credit for a sustainably produced crop within the agricultural value chain. So this is the type of program we run at PCM. This is a type of program that I typically recommend as being the most farmer friendly, because you are basically accounting for the sustainability of the product you produce. So PepsiCo works with us because they buy corn for corn chips and also corn syrup from Illinois, Nebraska, and Kentucky. And so, they want to account for any emissions reductions within their supply chain, and we're able to provide them the data to do that. So these pay you in the form of either metric tons of carbon sequestered per acre, or they'll give you a practice payment per acre. We've seen them both ways. There's also carbon offset programs, and this pays farmers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on behalf of a company outside of agriculture. For example, Microsoft, who has a carbon negativity goal, bought credits from Indigo. So these don't account for the emissions of the product on your farm, but they do account for just global carbon sequestration and reducing emissions that came out of Microsoft, for example. And then finally, we're just starting to get into this space, are the carbon intensity scores. This is a type of inset market. It's a different way to account for emissions associated with grain production, but this metric is most often associated with fuel production. We're going to see this trickle down to the farmers through the ethanol markets from the 45Z or 40B tax credit payments. This would come to a farmer as a premium per bushel of grain, and from your ethanol producer or whoever you're delivering grain to for ethanol production. But again, we haven't seen that roll out yet, but just something to keep on your mind in the horizon. And then finally, we have hybrid funding. And like I said, this is a combination of public and private funding, and this is going on in a really big way now through the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. So within the last 2 years, the USDA funded $3.1 billion worth of these projects. Over 25 of these programs are in Illinois, and they all additionally have corporate partners as match on them. So that $3.1 billion, I would estimate, is potentially even double of that. And this is money going to farmers to implement conservation across the United States. So I just talked to you about a ton of different programs. Some of them stack together, some of them don't. And so I want to go through how that works and just some high level rules for you to keep in mind. And if you do enroll in PCM, your specialist can work with you to stack federal and carbon market or carbon intensity programs. This is something our staff is really well versed on, and we do a lot of training on to make sure we can maximize the amount of funding available for you as a farmer as you transition into conservation agriculture. So just some general stacking rules. If your funding source is federal or state, you cannot be paid twice for the same practice on the same acre. You are contracted by practice. So you couldn't enroll in EQIP for cover crops and then fall covers for spring savings for cover crops. You also cannot sell a carbon credit or receive a carbon intensity premium twice from the same acre, no matter the practice. All of these practices work together to impact the amount of carbon you're storing in your soil. And so once you sell that carbon credit for that year, it is gone. And then additionally, for the most part, you could not be enrolled in two partnerships for climate smart commodity programs at the same time. And that is because they all have USDA funding, and then additionally, most of them have private company funding in there as well. And so that stacking has already happened for you behind the scenes for the most part. And the goal of that is to make it easier for you to enroll. So just some stacking rules, and so if you can internalize these, this will go a long way into helping you be able to navigate which programs are best for your farm. So if you are being approached by a market or a conservation program to enroll, this is a list of 6 questions you should really consider asking before you sign on the dotted line. And we will go through them one by one and talk about some of the ramifications around them. And the first question is, does this program pay only for new practices, or can you enroll if you have a history with a conservation practice? And this really comes up because of the principle of additionality. So carbon markets started actually with offset markets instead of inset markets. And in offset markets, the additionality principle is especially important because it basically says that these greenhouse gases would not have been sequestered in absence of the funding from the market. And because the data is leaving the value chain in an offset market, this is why additionality becomes so important. That being said, in a lot of inset markets, including ours, you can still enroll even if you have a history of cover cropping. But if you find an offset market and that works the best for your farm, just remember you can typically make a small change and still enroll. So if you've been only planting cereal rye, a lot of times like diversifying up your cover crop mixture will get you into the market. So I'll use our program as an example of an inset program that you can still enroll in if you have a history of a conservation practice. So you can see across the top for the first and second year of each of our three practices, cover crop, no-till, and MRTN or 10% nitrogen reductions, that you do get the highest dollar amount for implementing those practices for the first time. However, if you've been doing any, especially no-till and strip-till or cover crops longer, 3 years or longer, you can still enroll in our program. You're still producing a sustainably produced crop. That sustainably produced crop is still ending up in PepsiCo's value chain, and that's why we're able to offer this and work with the leaders in this space. So the next question you should ask if you are enrolling in a program is, what is the contract length? A lot of programs have 5, 10, 15-year contracts, especially in the offset market. And this is because aggregators need to ensure that the carbon will be sequestered for around 100 years between all the farms in their programs. And these carbon aggregators, such as Indigo, could put an entire country's worth of farms in one project to ensure permanence. But one thing to keep in mind for farmers is this is a rapidly changing landscape. I was just talking to Caitlin about, how often I have to update this talk because of how quickly everything has been changing in the past few years. And so, if you are being asked to sign a long contract, keep that in mind. Insetting programs tend to have shorter contracts. For example, PCMs is only 1 year. A few other insetting programs only have 1-year contracts. And we do this for multiple reasons, but one is to make sure it's farmer friendly and to make sure you have the most options as a farmer for enrolling going forward. Another question you should ask before enrolling is, what is the time burden on you as a farmer, and what are you going to have to do in addition to farming and implementing a new conservation practice in order to get that payment? A lot of markets will require you to do data entry on the computer. They may require you to do verification or to meet with somebody with verification, and this could look like anything from stand counts of cover crops in the field to pictures of a seed tag. And some markets even allow you to market your own credits. So the easiest option in all of this is opting for a market that does all or most of this for you. For example, this is why we have so many PCM specialists in Illinois, and that's so they can collect all your data 3 to 4 times a year and make sure that the data collection burden is easy. We also do any verification that would be required. So just make sure you ask, in addition to your day job, which is farming, what you're going to have to do in order to enroll. And one thing to really pay attention to with the marketing of credits, if there is not a buyer already set up for those credits, I typically don't recommend somebody enter that market. You don't want to put a lot of work into enrolling in something where there's nowhere for that credit to go. So always make sure there's a buyer when you're talking about how the credits get marketed. Another thing to ask your market representative is, what is the payment structure? So is it a pay for practice program? That's what we do, and that's a set price per acre. Is it a pay for outcomes program? So these are modeled outcomes, and there's a few different models. There's the COMET model, which was funded by the USDA out of University of Colorado. There's also the Cool Farm Alliance Cool Farm Tool, which is an international model. And there's the GREET model is what's looking like is going to be accepted for carbon intensity scoring. So there's the pay for outcomes, and that's when you're getting a modeled tons of CO2 per acre, and then they'll verify potentially about 10% of your fields, to true up that model, hopefully. And then with the carbon intensity score, as I mentioned, that is the GREET model, and this would be a premium on bushels at delivery. So another thing to ask, what is the funding source and who is the funding source? So, and I frame those a little bit differently just to make sure you as a farmer, landowner, enrollee knows, make sure to ask if there's any federal or state funding, if it's any inset, offset, or carbon intensity funding, or if it is a hybrid approach of these. And this just shows you what type of funding you're getting so that you don't accidentally double dip. With the amount of climate smart programs that are out right now that are combining both of these sources of funding, we've seen farmers accidentally double enroll in both federal and private programs, and it's because it's not always clear who is funding it up front. And so make sure you ask that in order to prevent accidental double dipping. And then finally, you need to ask what data you need and how it will be used. Who owns the data and how will they be using your data? What data, if any, is shared with the USDA, and can your data be sold to any other entity? Our data is becoming more valuable by the day in agriculture, and you just want to make sure if, for example, there are some like input providers that have carbon market programs, and you just want to make sure that if you're enrolling with them, that your data isn't being used to market a product back to you. And just a little information about PCM. Again, we are a nonprofit and we are housed within the Illinois Corn Growers Association, so we're not trying to sell you anything. We keep your data very secure, and it is all anonymized when it goes into reporting and aggregated. And so you're never identified as being in the program if you do enroll with PCM. And this is to protect you and your data, and also to make sure we can negotiate a good price for your data as well. So once you've asked your rep all of those questions, you will need to start preparing for program enrollment. And so the most important thing when it comes to program enrollment is understanding your conservation goals. And you want to make sure your conservation goals match your funding source. Are you trying to reduce erosion? Are you trying to reduce ponding? Do you want to keep more living roots in your soil? There are so many different programs. Make sure you're leading with your conservation goal and not just enrolling in a program to please that program. And this is a really good opportunity to use, if you're enrolled in PCM, our RAP report to understand local resource concerns and what inputs you could be reducing to potentially save funding on your side. Another thing to think about, especially when it comes to carbon markets, is it may be too early to enroll the whole farm, especially in a multi-year contract. Like I said, this space is changing very quickly, and so it's smart to start with a few fields at a time, especially if it's a multi-year contract. Also, you want to be prepared with good conservation agronomy. This is especially if you're introducing a practice for the first time. You want to find a conservation agronomist that can help you with that transition into conservation agriculture, or find farmers in your area that have done this before and really lean on them during this transition. It can be pretty stressful when you're going to plant, when everyone around you is planting, but you're a no-tiller, and so your soil's warming up a bit slower. We know there are some impacts of conservation agronomy on speed to get out and get things done. And so make sure you find an agronomist to help you. Your PCM can help connect you to an agronomist, and additionally, the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership has some great resources to connect you with conservation agronomists around the state. One thing you really need to do is get your data ready. Records and data are key to receiving the highest dollar for your work. And so with PCM, because you're giving us all your past data anyway, in order for us to benchmark your operation, we're able to take care of this for you and can give you your data back in a spreadsheet form in order to help you enroll in another market. But if you're just wanting to start organizing your data for yourself on your farm, organize it in a way that makes sense to you so that if somebody came to you and asked you for it, it'd be easy for you to give it to them. So if that's by field passives, if that's by field, make sure you get that ready. Additionally, we do in Illinois have pretty high custom application rates. And so as detailed as you can get from your custom applicator as to what date they applied things and what rate they applied things will be really helpful for enrolling in any of these programs. And finally, I'd encourage you to visit the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnerships website for a few different resources. The first one being the Ecosystem Service Markets handout that I have linked here, and then they also have what's called a farm tool. So the Eco Markets handout was developed about 2 years ago now, and this shows as of about this time last summer all of the ecosystem service programs available in Illinois. They have expanded that into the Find tool, and you're able to go in there, click on your county, click on what practices you do, what practices you've done before, and it will start filtering through all the incentive programs available to you in Illinois. So I'd really recommend you take a look at that to figure out what programs make sense for you and whether or not you'd like to enroll. So you have gotten to the point where you are in front of a program and they are wanting you to sign a contract for enrollment. And so these are a few things to keep in mind before you officially sign on the dotted line. You're going to want to make sure your contract length lines up with any of your land rental agreements. You just want to, especially for a multi-year agreement, you want to make sure that you will be farming that field for the length of your contract. Some programs actually require, if you're renting your ground, a letter from your landowner showing that it is being enrolled in the program and you will have access to the land for the length of your contract. So again, pay attention to your funding type. Are you in an inset market, an offset market, an ecosystem service market, or a federal conservation program? Pay attention to the contract fine print and understand the full terms of your agreement. For example, I know a certain company has, a few certain companies have contract language that tells you cannot put tiling in, a field that is enrolled in the carbon program, right? And that makes sense because as soon as you start digging for that tile line, you're emitting any carbon you've stored in the soil into the atmosphere. And so just wouldn't be a good fit for you or them. So just make sure if you have any long-term plans for any structural improvements to your ground that it aligns well with whatever contract you're signing. And then also you're going to want to pay attention to data usage. Again, we went over this earlier, but how will the carbon market use your data? The carbon markets also verify a few different ways, and it really depends on the market as to how it's going to happen. Are there going to be receipt audits, field visits, modeling, and satellites are all common. I really encourage you to enroll in a market that does as much of this for you as you can, just to reduce the burden on you during busy times of year. But make sure you ask that just in case you're needing to give an agronomist or a verifier access to either your receipts or your farm. Also pay attention to what program exclusions apply. We went over how to stack these earlier, but really, I cannot stress enough how important this is. A, understanding program stacking can maximize your payment, and B, it can potentially prevent you from accidentally double dipping. So make sure the contract lets you know whether the program enrollment excludes the grower from participating in other markets or other government programs. And, there have been, especially on the CPG side, a lot of companies that have been providing cost share programs for a long time. They've been really interested in working with the farmers in their supply chain to become more sustainable. But as these companies have made carbon reduction goals, a lot of the programs have switched to be inset programs. So many non-governmental cost share programs are now associated with the carbon asset. So if you've been working with a program for a long time, just make sure you know now if they're selling your carbon asset or not, so you don't accidentally enroll in another program. And then one thing to really pay attention to, especially with all the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodity programs, is what practice standards these programs have for you to implement a conservation practice. So for the cover crop 340 standard is something mandated in each state by NRCS, but at a national level, a lot of the different climate smart programs did get variances to make it easier for you to implement cover crops, for example, and then, enroll in that program. You are receiving a bit lower payment for these climate smart programs than you would in EQIP or CSP. And so, a lot of groups are working to make the standards a bit more relaxed as well. All this to say, don't assume that every program has the same planting standards and program requirements. Make sure that's very clear from you up front. You don't want to go through all the work of cover cropping, converting to no-till, and find out, you missed it by a hair. And so make sure your program rep tells you that up front. So this has been a pretty quick overview of everything that's going on in the market right now. I'm happy to answer any of your questions and go back through anything I may have missed.
Great, Megan. Well, we sure appreciate all of your insights. I do have one question here, and then we'll also be sure to have everyone go ahead and put your questions in the question box to the right of your screen there. We'll get those answered. So we've got plenty of time here at the end for questions. So anything that you have about programs Megan talked about or just specific questions in general, feel free to drop them in the question box, or Megan so kindly put her contact info on the screen too. So I know she'd be willing to take some questions if they are specific to your farm afterwards as well. But Megan, I'll toss you this first question. What do you see as the longevity of some of these carbon credit programs? If you'd maybe speak a little bit, I'm sure it's different when it comes to government payments versus private, but could you give us whatever insight you might have on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a few different thoughts on this. My first thought is I do think these insetting programs are going to be around a lot longer than these offsetting programs. With an insetting program, right, you're really just accounting for the emissions from your farm for producing corn and soybeans, and that is the product we produce. And so that's just really accounting for the work you're doing. With the offset model, I know, even there's just some more controversy around whether or not that's actually reducing emissions. And so I would say insetting programs are a bit safer. And then as far as the government funding, right, and we're about to be in election season, one thing I will always say is that I have trust in the Farm Bill, and I have trust that the Farm Bill programs will be there. I am a plant pathologist, and so don't want to comment on the longevity of the Inflation Reduction Act or anything like that. But I do feel confident that Farm Bill programs will be around just because of the bipartisan way that bill comes together.
Excellent. We sure appreciate that. It does seem like there's just so many complexities and so many layers that go into, all of these things. And I know a lot of us will have a lot of things to digest after this program today. So I did see a question that came through too that asked if we will send out the handouts for today, and we sure will. We'll send those slides out, and then this recording will be available as well. It'll be sent to the link that you register, or the email address that you registered for today's program with. So be on the lookout for that. I'll give it just another minute or two to see if we have any more questions pop in. So be sure to get those in if you have them as we wrap up here.
And I'll just, kind of comment again. There are a few different pathways I think like regulation could look like for conservation. And I think something that kind of surprised me personally was seeing the potential pick list for the Endangered Species Act and what practices you might need to implement in order to be able to spray our herbicides and pesticides and other things like that as they're, really enforcing the Endangered Species Act on the labels. And so whether it's nutrient regulation, Endangered Species Act regulation, I'm not trying to scare anybody by any means, but we have a really cool opportunity right now to try these things and get some funding for trying these things before it gets really mandated that we might have to do these things. And so just keep that in mind as you're dabbling, right? I wouldn't say enrolling in any of these carbon markets or conservation programs is like a way to get rich quickly. And so make sure you're committing to, make that practice change for reasons that make sense on your farm and to kind of future-proof your farm.
Yeah, it is nice that they do give us a chance to, dabble a little bit in some of these practices if they are unfamiliar and offset some of the costs without, in some cases, a ton of commitment and that sort of thing. So, yeah, hopefully, you know, we never know what the future looks like or what stewardship will be required of us, but it is nice to kind of get in front of it and also have some compensation for doing so.
For sure, for sure.
We did get another question that came in asking, how do these programs align with long-term leases for solar farms? Who gets the payments, the solar company or the landowner? So I don't know how well versed you are on some of the solar practices, but if you want to try to give that one a stab, go right ahead.
So I am like very loosely. I was a consultant for 1 year at a farm management firm, and so we were dealing with this a lot then. So I can't comment too much on it other than I know there are leases for solar farms, and I know that they are also buying out there are situations where they're actually buying out the ground. Obviously, when they're buying out the ground, they as the owner would get that, but I don't have a good answer on that. But I would look in your contract and potentially use that as a negotiation tactic, ask for an amount of that credit, especially if it's being leased, because similar to some of these other programs, right? If you are the landowner, you're responsible for keeping that carbon in the ground. So I don't have a super great answer for that, but look in your contract and try. I would, see what you can negotiate there.
Kind of spinning off of that, some of these longer contracts, you talked about some of the offset markets being 10 to 15 years. If, say, if you got approached by a solar farm and wanted to terminate your contract, is that something that oftentimes you can get out of, or how binding are those, when we get into years 8, 9, 10? And I know for some instances we aren't there yet, but
Yeah.
what insights do you have?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting question when it comes to solar, and I haven't encountered this specifically. So I do know for weather and kind of other things that would be considered like an act of God, you wouldn't have to pay anything back. That being said, so these programs with longer contracts often have a deferred payment. So you're in a 5-year contract and you get, 50% of it the first year after you do cover crops, and then another 20 to 10% every year after that. And so you might not get your full payment, but I would just check that's a really great thing to ask your program manager, is how easy is it for me to get out of this? And would I have to, and really the better question is, if I did leave, would I have to pay you back? Things definitely vary by program. I don't want to speak for every program. And with ours just having a 1-year contract, it's not been something I've encountered specifically. So.
Well, great. We appreciate you, shedding some light on some of those. And that is the little bit nerve-wracking thing about some of those longer contracts, is you just never know what, 10 or 15 years in the future might look like. But all things to add to our list of things to think through before signing contracts for our farms. So
For sure.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up here. We just want to, give a big thank you to Megan. We appreciate the time that you've spent here teaching us a little bit. I know it's just a fraction of all the knowledge that you've got of these programs and all the insights that you have, but we do greatly appreciate the time that you've spent here with us and leaving us all with some food for thought and things to dig into as we approach fall. And I guess one more question before you get off. What do some of the time frames look like as far as getting signed up for these? If we've got folks that are new to it and want to get signed up, what does that timeline look like?
Yeah, so for most programs, I would say harvest is the cutoff, right? Because for the next crop year, that's the first time you make a conservation decision as far as either not tilling or putting in a cover crop, or even if you're switching from fall applied end to spring applied end. So most programs do have a cutoff of about harvest time. That being said, most of them will talk to you all year. They may just defer you until another year. So they're all pretty willing to at least start getting you in the pipeline before if you target outside of harvest. So
excellent. Well, we've got a little bit more time to continue thinking about it, but that sure is right around the corner, whether we
it really is,
or not.
yes. So, and just to plug the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership again, they do have, if you are needing to source cover crops for the first time, they do have a cover crop dealer list. So if you go to the ISAP website, Google Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, and then search cover crop dealers, they have some good resources to help you find that if you are new to the practice. So
great. That is super helpful. We'll go ahead and include that link as well whenever we send out some of the follow-up materials to everyone on this call today. It sounds like a great resource to check out. So,
awesome.
All right. Well, a final few items as we close out here. I know we've all got tons to think about now, and we've got not really a ton of time to do it, depending on what Mother Nature gives us and what harvest shapes up to be. But today's webinar will be recorded for any of you that want to circle back as you are perusing or kind of thinking through some of these programs and offerings. And we will send those slides out too. So those will be on farmcreditil.com/minded. And then we'll also send the link as well. So when you close out of the webinar today, a brief 3-question survey will pop up. If you could take a few moments to complete that, it helps us improve our webinars for the future and ensures that we're covering topics that you want to hear about. So lastly, we're going to sneak one more Ag Minded Hour webinar in before hopefully the combines start rolling here. So join us next month with FCI's Chief Appraiser, Kent Reed, to cover Farm Credit Illinois' land value study. We benchmark farms through central and southern Illinois and kind of follow those land value trends from year to year. So we're excited to hear what he has to tell us. And you can find that program link where you signed up today at farmcreditil.com/learning. So thank you again to all of you for spending an hour with us, but also to Megan for sharing her expertise. Don't hesitate to reach out to her or the staff here at Farm Credit if we can connect you with her. We would sure love to do so. So if we don't see you again before then, have a great rest of your summer and a safe harvest, and we hope to catch you on the next webinar. Thanks.